This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country on where this podcast is recorded. We recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today. Warning: this episode contains mentions of suicide and mental illness. Listener discretion is advised, and if you need help, Lifeline is available in Australia on 13 11 14.
It's okay to question, it's okay to doubt, and actually that's quite healthy because it means that you're contemplating your faith and you are reaffirming it within yourself all the time and you're reapplying it to your daily life. And so, that's not to be shied away from, and it's not something that is remiss of you. I think it's, a healthy thing to do.
I'm Georgia and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that reminds you of the good in the world. Each episode tells the story of someone who has found real hope in challenging times and made the world a better place. Episode 47, Lisa Gallate, Part 2. Last week on Finding Hope, we met Lisa Gallate, an accidental grief expert. Lisa courageously shared of the death of her older sister Zoe in a car accident, her younger brother Justin to brain cancer, and her first husband Mark to suicide. Enough tragedy to last a lifetime. But heartbreakingly, Lisa still had more grief to endure. Let's get back into her story. Lisa Gallate, it is a pleasure to have you once again on the Finding Hope podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Georgia.
Now, last episode we talked about some significant losses that you've had in your life. Obviously, that of your sister, of your brother, of your first husband. I want to talk about your mum as well, because I think this is more of a journey that a lot more people will be able to relate to, in the sense that so many people are affected by dementia, not just those that have it. You talk in the book, which is a phrase that I found quite powerful, the slow creep of dementia. Can you describe what you mean by that and how that manifested in your life?
Sure. Thanks, Georgia. So I think for most people who have the experience of a loved one with dementia, it is a condition that sort of presents itself very gradually, and it's very easy to ignore the signs and symptoms of it, and also to try and deny them as well, so both by patient and by family. And it's very hard to accept that there is an issue there, and as it becomes more obvious, it becomes harder to accept, actually, because it's the reality of what's ahead as well as what's actually going on at the time. And for my mum, she had sort of gradual decline, as most dementia sufferers do, and it was sort of not very telling initially, and then it became very telling as she became more unwell. She also was very clever in trying to hide it, and that's a very common way that dementia patients deal with it as well, which is something that I came to know just through my experience of watching my mum decline. And as much as she was in denial, I think the rest of the family were as well, and we really didn't want to accept what was happening for her. And very much so for my father, who was probably the most in denial, and he needed some help and support to appreciate the reality of what was happening for my mum. And that was something that I really encouraged, and I really sort of persisted with explaining to Dad the importance of getting mum diagnosed and having that intervention by her GP, and also having a specialist consultation to assess mum's wellness and unwellness, and also sort of what stage she was at particular points in her life.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, more about that denial from your father, especially because it can be so easy, when you're up close every day, it's quite difficult to actually see the decline. It's often by people, coming and looking in from the outside that you kind of get that reality check. Were you able, because you were geographically so far away, obviously in Sydney, your parents were in New Zealand. Did you feel like you had to be that reality check at times?
Oh, very much so, Georgia, and you're exactly right. I think that when you are living with someone on a day-to-day basis, it's very easy to not notice those small signs. And for me, I was able to notice them as big signs because Mum was changing rapidly from when I had last seen her, although for me that was a rapid deterioration. For her it was a gradual deterioration because it might be 3 to 6 months between visits. So for Dad, he was very much in denial, and I think as well too that he really wanted to try and placate Mum and try and make life as easy for her as he could, and oftentimes he didn't want to be confrontational or struggle with any sort of debate about where she was up to in her own health and wellness. And one key thing that that came up a lot in those early stages was Mum's ability to manage daily life independently. And that's something that really happens very quickly for a lot of families, as there is that struggle about what the person within the family is able to really do by themselves and for how long they're able to maintain their independence. And that's a very hard thing to give up, as well as being able to go out independently, go down the street independently, go to the shops, drive a vehicle with passengers in it. And unfortunately, Mum's driving just went wayward very quickly. And so it wasn't just her own safety that we were concerned about as a family, but for other road users and also other passengers in the car, that became an issue pretty quickly.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about those final months? Did your mum end up having to go to a nursing home? Did you get a carer? What was the situation? Because I assume your dad didn't solely care for her.
No, that's right, Georgia, and that's a really good. It's a very good testament to just how prolonged this illness can be, and because my mum was unwell with it for several years, and her progression was gradual, so she was able to stay at home really for as long as possible, as we tried as much as we could to support her and support Dad for her to be able to do that. And that must have been sort of like the best part of nearly 3 or 4 years. And then it was increasing care levels. So she was able to go and visit a nursing home, a sort of residential nursing home, but go in for day visits to give Dad some respite, and also to provide some outings for Mum and to be surrounded by different company in a different environment. And then those visits became longer, and then she was in nursing home care for some time until her level or stage of dementia became progressively worse, and then she needed to have secure dementia care in a dedicated dementia hospital. So I think that my mum was probably in sort of like the highest level of care for maybe the last few years of her passing.
The cruelty of dementia is, as Lisa said, that slow creep. Eventually, though, Lisa's mum did pass away, and her dad was left alone. His true pain had barely begun.
He would probably say that he almost within himself sort of really lost a fundamental reason for being, because he was very much her carer every day until she passed. And even when she was in hospital care, he went and saw her every day. He took her out for short trips. They became shorter as Mum's unwellness progressed, but she was able to go out for, she used to get day passes to go out and explore vineyards and wineries and restaurants, and they turned into, cafes and drives and short trips closer to the hospital. So he was able to do that with her for a long time, and then it became, walks in the wheelchair and around the neighbourhood, etc. And then those sorts of day trips changed as well, and then it was just visits and sitting in the garden in the grounds of the hospital, etc. So for him, he really did lose a big part of his own daily life and his own daily routine, and he had previously been living with mum independently, and suddenly he was living by himself. And although mum had been in hospital for some time, I think he still felt a sense of belonging, that he was still with his partner in life, even if she was living somewhere else.
Yeah. Now, your mum passed away back in September 2019, so 6 months before COVID lockdowns essentially hit. And then I think the only country that was probably on a stricter lockdown than Australia was New Zealand. So you were separated from your family for all of that time. How did your dad cope?
Oh, Dad found it really hard. He had a short trip after Mum passed. He had a short trip overseas. I was able to see him before we went into lockdown. So we had sort of like 2 brief occasions where we were able to spend some time together. And then as soon as our lockdown lifted the first time, I was able to go over for a short trip. But, they were long periods of him being by himself in the same home that he had shared with Mum, and having to live his grief on a daily basis without the care and support and the distraction of other people there to help him go through that grieving.
How did you support him from afar?
Georgia, it's really interesting because I elected to sort of try and make as many phone calls with him as I could whenever I could. So even if they were very short ones, or they were interrupted by my children or my work or my husband or any of other life's demands, he had very quick calls sometimes, but I always thought that quick calls were better than no calls. And I made a point of speaking to him probably every day or every other day for 3 or 4 months, and then over time it would be a little bit less regular than that. And I always made a point of trying to make sure that I was sharing with him what was happening in my life. So we were talking, 3 or 4 times a week, and I would just grab anybody who was near me to say hello to my dad as well, so he could hear somebody else's voice other than just my own all the time.
By this stage, Lisa had experienced 4 significant losses in her life, and she'd become quite an accidental expert on the art of grief. So, before we go any further into Lisa's story, I asked her to share some tips that she'd learnt along her grief journey, which she has documented in her memoir, Just Because. What I really love in the book is that you said grief has no time limit or calendar. And I think everyone who's experienced grief in any form knows that. It can quite literally sneak up on you immediately. When has your grief caught you by surprise?
Sometimes it catches me by surprise just about every other day. At other times it may not catch me at all for quite a while. So it really sort of depends on what's happening and what the prompts and triggers are that might be around me, or what I might be doing, or who I might be with. And I think that probably some of the biggest triggers are when I'm dealing with anniversaries of people's birthdays, or the dates of their deaths, or at other special times of the year that are like family occasions like Easter or Christmas or New Year's or even Halloween. But there's so many triggers in our lives, and that's because by nature we're social creatures, so we're meant to be together, and we're intelligent beings who are emotionally intelligent and emotionally able. And I think because of all of that, it means that we feel very deeply, and it's a lot to manage. It's a lot to carry, and it's very easily triggered at different times.
With those anniversaries and certain dates, you can not prepare for them. You can't prepare for your reaction to them, but you know that they're coming. Is there something that you do to prepare or take care of yourself? Do you have any, routines or rituals that you do for those dates?
I think the answer absolutely is yes, but I think it actually precedes those dates because I do like to sort of prepare for them in advance, and it doesn't mean weeks in advance. It can be the night before, but I do like to sort of think about how I'm going to manage the next day, what it looks like, what I want it to look like, what I want to do, how I'm going to reflect on my sister's passing, for example. If it's her birthday, maybe I'll do something in the morning, a small ritual to think of her. I might light a candle, and if we're at home during the day, I'll keep the candle burning, and if not, it has to get blown out as I'm heading to work. But it's very, very much a case of thinking about how I want that day to look like, and how and with whom I'm going to share it, and what we're going to do. So I think preparation is the key, and then also sort of being malleable to actually how the day unfolds, because sometimes we can have the best of intentions and then it can just fall apart. And I think it's really important to be around people who are understanding, will appreciate that may happen for you, and that you may want to actually change plans during the course of the day. So I think sort of being flexible and being kind to yourself as well means that we need to create lots of options for ourselves about how we manage those sorts of days, and that's just as important as going through those early days and weeks and months of the grieving process. It's an acceptance that the grief is always going to be with you, and it's a question about how we manage it in our own lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about other people in your world as well, whether it's in those early weeks and months, or if it's, people that help you manage your grief now. What things have you found helpful that people say or do?
So I think probably one of the biggest things that's been most helpful for me is just being available and making themselves available, whether it's by saying I'm available if you want to talk, or by actually just turning up and being there and being present, having a listening ear, and just being open-minded, being understanding. And there are no special words, there's no special magic. And I think it's really important that people sort of allow themselves to get past the formalities and the expectations that they either impose on themselves or others to think that there's special things that they need to say, because really there isn't. There's a lot of discussion about what not to say and what people shouldn't say, and people can find it very difficult to know what to say, but there's no right or wrong to that. And I think the most important thing is to just speak from your heart and understand that someone that you love or care about is in pain, and they may just want you to be with them.
Do you find that talking about your sister and your brother and people bringing, stories of them, does that help you?
It has helped me a lot, and it still helps me, and it's really lovely when I hear of someone else's memory of that person, when something pops up that I may not have known about, or that is completely unexpected, or it's just perfectly fitting for the moment. So they're really nice special occasions, and that's the importance of memory, is it's not just memory for ourselves, but it's memories to share.
Yeah. Now you've had, some great therapeutic ways to manage your grief in the past. I want to talk about running because you talk a little bit about that in the book as well. This is something did you first take it up after your sister passed away?
No, I had actually just sort of started really before my sister passed, but I was very much a sort of short distance runner at that point and didn't run very far. But I was sort of running at university. And so after my sister passed and I went back to uni, I resumed my running. It was still sort of short distance, and I had lots of excuses not to get out there in the morning, but I really did try hard to maintain a routine because I really needed it for my own stress management, my own grief management, as it turned out. And one of the beauties of running, and this is the same for any other exercise or therapy that we apply ourselves to, is I think that it's a singular focus, and it means that you distract yourself from what else is going on in the moment, and you don't have that mind noise or mind chatter. You're able to just concentrate on what you're doing, and it becomes very simple. And it's, for me, it was just thinking about what I was doing, what my running route was going to look like, how long I had to get back in time to get to university. And so it was a really good way, good, healthy way of helping myself. And I think that's really important, is the need for us to find the things that are going to help us.
And you didn't just, run for your own therapy. You actually run the New York Marathon, which is just incredible to me. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I had actually, when I came to Sydney, I joined Sydney Striders, which is a big running group here in Sydney, and it was a great way of meeting lots of people. And they had a marathon training group, so it was a group that you could join to be in amongst other novice marathon runners and run your first marathon with a group who were there to support you, which was amazing. So I ran the Canberra Marathon as my first marathon with somebody, a couple of people who actually turned out to be lifelong friends. I'm still very good friends with them, so it's really nice. And so I did a few other marathons, and then decided that, my brother was no longer here, and he had run one marathon, and he and I had always said that we'd run a marathon together. And so I thought, well, if I was going to run one more, it would have to be the best and the biggest. And so that's why I chose to go over to the US and run the New York Marathon. So I applied for it and was able to secure a ticket. So you actually have to go through an application process.
Yeah, what does it like a qualifying time? What do you have to do?
Oh, so it's not so much. So Boston, the Boston Marathon is a qualifying marathon. The New York Marathon is just a matter of actually being able to secure yourself a ticket number to be able to run the marathon. So that was just a application process through a travel agency that was able to secure tickets and able to provide accommodation and support for the marathon.
Yeah, that's cool. What does marathon training actually look like? Because you went from a person who just started running, and eventually you built that up. But marathons are a whole other beast. I mean, 42 kilometres.
Yeah, it is a fair distance, Georgia. But there are plenty of other athletes in the world who've done a whole lot more and some. So I'm very mindful of the fact that it's not the great feat for a lot of athletes that it was for me. It's just a regular nobody in terms of running. But you're right, it is a dedicated commitment to training for it, because you don't just get there on prowess and good faith. You do have to put in the effort, because otherwise it's the last 12 kilometres that will really show up. If you're training has been deficient, you will feel it. You'll feel the pain in those last 12 Ks. And that's because physiologically we're apparently not built to run a marathon. That's
a reason for me not to run one.
It's a feat of endurance from that respect. So, it's something that not all of us will do. And, it was just really special to be able to do it, especially to run the New York Marathon in memory of my brother. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's incredible. Now, another thing that's been hugely therapeutic for you is obviously writing. You've come out with this book. Why did you want to write Just Because?
There were a few reasons, Georgia. One obviously was to help other people, because, and I know that sounds really glib, but it is so true, and that's because I spent so much time looking for literature that would be supportive of me in my own grieving. And from the perspective of somebody who was dealing with a lot of loss, I found it very hard to find everyday books by everyday people in which they'd share their lost stories. There was a lot of academic literature about death and dying and grief. So I thought it was important to share my own story. Also that it was a very sort of cathartic exercise for myself. And I think it was also just really important to create another perspective about grief because I'm very much of the view that despite what your own individual preferences might be in terms of whether you're an open person or very private with your emotions and feelings, I think it's really important that we express and share our grief and our learning so that we can teach our young and so that they're not confronted by death and grief as something that's very abnormal and foreign, because it's very much a part of life. And I think it's really important that we have conversations about death and dying and grief and loss, and that we, can show empathy towards others and build that in our communities in the same way that we've seen an increasing awareness and respect for mental health issues.
Yeah. I want to ask about the title. Why Just Because? I had a bit of a guess. I don't know if I'm right. Is it because so often we try and create reason around why bad things happen to us?
That's right, Georgia. I mean, I think that, there could be 1,000 reasons and then there can be none. And too often, particularly with unnatural or sudden deaths, it's very hard to find the reason, and often there is none. So at the end of the day, things do just happen just because, and there is no rhyme or reason to it. And I think once you get past that in your grieving process as well, because it's an often asked question why something has happened or why we've lost someone so early or prematurely, or, in such difficult circumstances, or where they've been so unwell, why were they struggling for so long with their own health issues, or why didn't I know that? I mean, there's so many questions that abound, that they're limitless, and I think it does come back to just because.
How did you reconcile your faith with all the loss? Because I think a big barrier for people, especially with, as you said, those sudden unexpected deaths, is finding that reasoning. And often people turn to God. They're like, why? Why would God let this happen to me, happen to my family? How did, you reconcile your faith? I assume it's probably changed over the years as well.
It has actually, Georgia. I was, as a young adult, when I lost my sister, I was very angry, and that's, a very common symptom of the early stages of grief. And I struggled to understand why God, if he was so loving, could take my sister and take her partner at such a young age, and why God couldn't have intervened to stop the accident from happening. So I was very angry, and I was very frustrated, and I was very questioning about my own faith. I was also actually quite upset that we were actually having her funeral in a church, because I felt, how can we say farewell to my sister in God's house when God wasn't with her when she died? So that was really hard, and I sort of, I feel it now because it's so sort of alarming to take a very, very hard position on it. But, that's where my mind went in terms of my own faith. And I think it took me quite a long time to reconcile that ultimately. And it's been really interesting. I've spoken to a few Anglican ministers, because my father was of Anglican faith, although Christian and Greek Orthodox. But so within the Christian faiths, I think that there's a sort of unspoken understanding that ultimately, and maybe an acceptance as well, is that ultimately God doesn't have control over everything. That God doesn't have control over what happens on earth, or how humans behave, or what we do. That he can be our guide. Sometimes perhaps he can be our protector, but he's never our controller. And ultimately, the things that happen are the things that do happen because they do. And God can be there with us in times of our grief and sorrow and loss. And I would like to think that he was there when my sister passed, but it doesn't mean that he is the controller of everything and was able to intervene and stop it from happening.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It's a really a vulnerable thing to share, so I really appreciate it. Lisa, how did experiencing so much death and loss change your view on life in general?
Well, again, it probably sounds very glib, Georgia, but ultimately it really does make you very finely tuned into the here and now, and to really appreciating every day and realizing that there is a limited life in front of all of us, and there is an often said quote that as soon as we are born, we are in the process of dying, because we are moving one day closer to our own demise. And, that sounds rather macabre, but if you think about it, it's just a recognition that we are all here for such a short time, and none of us know how long or short that will be. And so it did make me take pause, and actually I have been quite reflective at different times as these losses have happened, and really given thought to where I am in my own life and what I'm doing and what I'm prioritising, what's important, what I put focus on, and what are the things that I can really let go of and just be a little bit more. And I think that's really important, is to just be. And we do tend as adults particularly to fill up our lives too much and fill up our time too much. And I am very much one of those people. So I learnt from when I was at university the importance of having some of those lesson periods where you had nothing on, and they were the best part of my day, where I had 40 minutes where I could get a coffee, sit and chat to people, go into the library, think about my next lesson, or just be and do nothing and people watch. And there's a lot to be said for people watching and a lot to be said for just being.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're good at that now, that comes naturally to you?
I'm definitely better at it than I was. I think my husband would probably say that I'm still pretty bad at it. Even if I'm people watching, I've still got my mind on something.
What would you say is the benefit of people watching and just being?
Well, I think it's really important, because just as we need sleep to rest and recover, we also need to give our minds rest as well. And so, that needs to happen in the active part of our days, where you need to sort of like take short periods to reset and recharge and get ready for the next item on the agenda. So that's why I think it's really worthwhile to schedule some time out. If you're going to have lots of meetings, it's really important to make them slightly shorter than you might want, so you've got the 5 or 10 minutes in between to reset yourself. And also the same with your daily life, even if it doesn't involve meetings, but maybe it involves lots of different activities. I think it's really important, rather than jumping from one to the next, to be able to just take a pause, because if you're not really appreciating and enjoying and feeling, then is there the same value in the doing?
Lisa, I want to talk about your dad as well, because since writing the book, you very sadly lost your dad as well. Can you share a little bit about how that happened?
Dad was unwell with chronic conditions, as you might expect. He was 87. He was managing them very well, though, very carefully, and had a terrific GP. But he actually went to a community-based lunch and unfortunately got COVID, and then had a couple of falls in the home while he was sick with COVID. And unfortunately, the second time that he went to hospital, that was his last visit, and he succumbed to COVID on the COVID ward in hospital.
Lisa's fifth significant loss in her life. More than anyone should have to endure. Lisa was grateful for one small mercy, though, that she was able to see her dad before he died.
I flew over from Australia to be with him. I got the permission of the charge nurse of the ward to visit him on the ward, because it would have been pretty futile to have flown over and not been able to see him. So I was, immensely glad, although as ironic as that sounds, I was immensely glad that the charge nurse gave me that permission. But there were a lot of COVID patients on that ward, and I was dressed in full PPE gear every time I went onto the ward. And in fact, as I exited his room, I had to take off the PPE gear in the anti-room before I went back out onto the ward, because they were very careful about sort of trying to avoid cross-contamination. And it was pretty harrowing to see the plight of all these poor patients who were struggling themselves to manage their COVID symptoms. And unfortunately for Dad, it was just not going to be possible for him to get through it. And his medical team were very realistic and very honest about how they were going to treat Dad. And they spoke to Dad, because Dad could hear them even if he had, lost his own voice, wasn't able to communicate back. They were very good at explaining to him exactly what was happening, and they were very frank with me. And I really applauded them for that, because as difficult as it must have been to have those conversations with families, it made me appreciate very much how their own job involves managing the situation for patients, and that it's two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, they are trying to make sure that people who can be healed and can reasonably recover and lead reasonable lives are able to do so, and that by the same token, if patients are really too unwell to be able to continue a meaningful life, that they will provide the best support and palliative care that they can. And these doctors were amazing in terms of recognising, their own responsibilities, but also, the limits of what they're able to achieve. I don't really think that we've spent enough time recognising what our medical and nursing staff have done, and the risks that they were confronted with, and the risks that they took to their own health and well-being by being on the front line and managing and supporting people who were, incredibly and gravely sick with COVID, which was, a very debilitating illness. And people have gone above and beyond, and it's a real shame, I think, that we haven't seen more recognition of what people have been through and the efforts of our first responders and our medicos and nursing staff over the last 3 years. And of course, the pandemic continues. I mean, it's no longer front page news, but in Australia we've had nearly 16,000 deaths now. So unfortunately, COVID hasn't gone away as yet. To remember those who have passed and those who are mourning, but also as a time when we can reflect on the efforts of everybody involved in our medical and health systems, and also to recognise all the charities that have given great service to people in our communities who've needed it, who've been displaced, who've lost businesses and livelihoods and been dislocated from families, and who are also probably still recovering now. And as well, I think we need to sort of have some hope for the future, that if we are ever confronted with another pandemic of this ilk again, that we will be better informed and better able to meet it.
I want to talk quickly about your dad's faith. I love what you wrote in the book about his faith. It was so steadfast throughout his life. Losing 2 children, losing a wife, I can't imagine the pain that he went through in his life. What did you learn about faith from your dad?
I think probably the greatest thing that I learned from Dad is that it's okay to question, it's okay to doubt, and actually that's quite healthy, because it means that you're contemplating your faith, and you are reaffirming it within yourself all the time, and you're reapplying it to your daily life. And so that's not to be shied away from, and it's not something that is remiss of you. I think it's a healthy thing to do. And Dad was very very certain, though, that God was with him even in his darkest hours. And I think that probably did help Dad a lot. And I think as well, it certainly helped Dad as he was being confronted with his own death, that he knew that as he was passing, that God would be with him, and that he firmly believed that he would meet his son and his daughter and my mum in heaven, and that they would be there to welcome him.
There's a line in the book that I think a lot of people have heard before, but grief is the price of love. What have you learnt about love from all the grief that you've had to endure, Lisa?
Gosh, that's a really big question. There's, some lovely things that have been spoken about love. William Shakespeare wrote, "Love is kind," but William Shakespeare actually also wrote about how grief can overwhelm us if it's not spoken, and the importance, I think it's in Macbeth, he speaks about the importance of speaking and expressing grief. And it's the same with love. I think it's really important that we share and express our love, because at the end of the day, if you can share that love, then you'll have no regrets when someone passes. And maybe our family takes it to the nth degree, because every time that any of us go in or out of the house, there's always a shout out, "Love you, bye, I love you too." And it's at the end of every phone call with my children, and most of the time it's my children that initiate it, because they just love to tell me and I love to tell them. But sometimes they can say it 3 or 4 times, and just, I think it's just to delay the end of the phone call. But ultimately, I think love is something that is a noun, but it's also a verb and an adjective, and we have to, make it a really big part of our language. It's one word with many, many different meanings, and we've got to share all of those meanings with everybody in our lives who count.
Thank you to Lisa Gallate for sharing her story so beautifully. For more information about Lisa's memoir, Just Because, you can visit the show notes. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends. Stories are always better when they're shared, and you never know what someone can learn from another's journey. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share, and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. Let all that you do be done in love. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 14. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.